We wanted to make sure that we still had a representation on the world stage. How do we do this? We're kind of putting together a band. It's kind of a little bit of this band, a little bit of that band. We've gotten about 170 nominations for students. These kids are going to have the opportunity to march down the street in the Rose Parade.
Hello and welcome to episode 16 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of June 10th, 2024. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including a new NBA vice president. No, not that NBA, the other one. A childhood band memory. Another peek behind the podcast curtain. And I have a conversation with a gentleman who's got eyes on Pasadena. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. This is a fun one, I think. At least I had fun putting it together. There are tuba section stories, there are community band thoughts, and I have another brief tale of this podcast's history, which I'm sure you're desperate to know. Yes, indeed. So, empty your spit valves and away we go. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Starksville, Mississippi. Mississippi State University Director of Bands Elva K. Lance has been elected Vice President of the National Band Association. Lance will serve a 2-year term as VP before moving into the roles of President-elect and President. She assumed her duties this week during the Executive Council's meeting in Washington, D.C. In more than 30 years of university service, Lance has led MSU's band program through the completion of a multi-million-dollar rehearsal facility, construction of a new synthetic turf practice field, and student enrollment growth. She maintains an active schedule as a clinician and adjudicator for concert and marching band events throughout the country and has served as state chair for both the NBA and College Band Directors National Association. Lance also is an elected member of the American Bandmasters Association. Mississippi State Music Department head Daniel Stevens said, quote, "For 40 years, Ms. Lance has continued to break barriers among societal norms and proven that inclusivity and innovation provide pathways for future students to excel as educators and professional musicians." Founded in 1960, the NBA is the largest professional band organization in the world. It promotes band activities across the globe and includes representatives from universities and elementary, middle, and high school bands, as well as conductors of professional ensembles and community and military bands. Dateline, Townsend, Massachusetts. The Townsend Military Band opened its 2024 Thursday evening concert series this past week. The band will perform Thursday evenings this summer through at least August 8. The band is managed by Betty Mae Tenney of Townsend and conducted by Thomas Souza of Chelmsford. Souza, who also directs the Brandeis University Wind Ensemble, plans to feature well-known show tunes, marches, patriotic music, and children's music during these concerts. The concerts are funded by the town of Townsend. Why is he including this in the first strain? A brief editorial note here. Listeners of this podcast will be unsurprised to learn two things. First, I am hip-deep in the operations of a community band also located in north-central Massachusetts. I happen to be its conductor, but in a story I will tell sometime soon, even if I weren't, I would likely be playing in it. It's just good people. And I am all in favor of promoting any town band, community band, school band, whatever. The Townsend Military Band and the Neshoba Valley Concert Band, that's my outfit, are not competitors. This is not a zero-sum game. You can attend concerts of more than one band. Your loyalty to one band does not keep you from also being loyal to another. In our competition-driven society, this is a concept that is a harder sell than it ought to be, but you can appreciate the Boston Symphony and the Baltimore Symphony. You can root for the Blue Devils and Carolina Crown. You can enjoy listening to the President's Own and Pershing's Own. Boston College and Boston University, well, that's a much harder sell for a lot of folks I know on both sides of that little rivalry, but the general idea still stands, I think. What I've come to understand, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't know this earlier, is that Massachusetts, north-central Massachusetts in particular, is littered with community bands. Several of my recent podcast guests have talked about being part of one or another of them. Back in episode 8, Alexa Nicandros talked about being a member of 2 community bands in Cape Cod alone, and one of those was the subject of last week's trio section. And none of them are checking your loyalty card at the entrance gate to their concerts. Listen to concerts by as many bands as you like. They're all looking for audiences. Come to think of it, perform with as many bands as you like, to the extent that you can make the rehearsal and concert dates all fit into one single human being's schedule. Until they come up with reliable cloning technology, there will be a limit to that, I suppose. But a number of players in my community band play with somebody else, too. It's fun to go to those other concerts and heckle. Cheer them on. All right, I'll climb down off my soapbox now. That's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. On the other side of this quick break, things I did promise to tell. Hope you'll keep listening. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, last week my conversation with Tom Borning included a chat about the Portraits of Cape Cod piece that his community band concertized with, and one of the movements was called the Witt-Tileston Bandstand. And that movement sent my little memory brain careening back a solid half-century to the evening when I figured out what band was. When I was a wee toddler, my father worked for the Polaroid Corporation. He was involved in a number of little projects there, such as, only the first instant camera, the SX70. In those days, the late 1960s and early 70s, Polaroid actually shut down its operations for a month in the summer, generally July. And since we had the capacity to do it, our family would pack itself up and live for those 3 weeks or so on Cape Cod. We would rent part of a little house in some little town. For several summers it was Wareham, but it was other places too. But we would center most of our leisure activities in the town of Chatham. If you're not familiar with Cape Cod except for its shape, which is basically that of a short-sleeved arm being flexed to show off its owner's well-developed bicep, then Provincetown is up at the fingertips, Woods Hole and Hyannis are at the hem of the t-shirt's sleeve, and Chatham splits the difference. In fact, one of the nicknames for the town is Cape Cod's Elbow Land, which is a song lyric, and I'll get to that. One July morning, when I was about to turn 6, probably, I and my parents and my very young sister were ambling along the main drag in Chatham, which might as well be a Norman Rockwell painting. It's a street lined with shops and a couple of museums and restaurants and an ice cream joint in the middle of town with tall stools to sit on at the counter and crosswalks painted a cheerful green, and all the traffic in the world going very, very slowly because there were plenty of people using those crosswalks, and always the smell in the air of the beaches that faced the Atlantic Ocean that were just a couple of blocks away. My family spotted the sign that said free band concert Friday 8 p.m. or something like, and we conspired to bring blankets and lawn chairs and a picnic basket and other things to keep small children occupied on that Friday night to Kate Gould Park, a tract of land just off Chatham's main street, which was a lush green crater, and at the base of that crater stood a little bandstand, and on summer Friday nights that bandstand was, and still is, stuffed full of the Chatham Band. Wearing red uniform coats and Marine Corps-style flat hats and packing all the instruments necessary, and led at the time by a gentleman in an all-cream-colored uniform with gold buttons and honest-to-God epaulets and a citation cord, whose name was Witt-Tileston. Webster Whitney Tileston was the director of the Chatham Band, one of only 4 directors ever, for 48 years, from 1946 to 1994, the summer before he passed away in February 1995. He was the vocal music teacher for the Chatham school system for decades and was known as Mr. Music and the Heidi-Ho Man for his standard pre-concert greeting to the audience, hip hip and Heidi-Ho. Mr. Tileston revived the Chatham Band after it had all but disbanded as members served during World War II. The bandstand at the park was named in his honor on his 80th birthday, and he was the recipient of a commendation from Governor Michael Dukakis and the state legislature that same year. He was very much like Robert Preston's Music Man, except he wasn't a con man at all. And yes, he led the band through marches and show tunes and all the usual community band stuff, but always a rendition of the Bunny Hop and Here We Go Loop-de-Loo, during which parents brought their little kids down to the bandstand and paraded around it, waving their balloons and occasionally losing hold of them while the music played. Yes, my parents brought me down to do that. Yes, I had my balloon. Yes, I let go. Yes, there was crying. But while I don't know the exact date of the first Chatham Band concert I ever attended, I do know that it was the first moment that I ever heard a live concert band, and it absolutely planted the seeds of interest that pointed me toward taking up the trumpet, then the saxophone, then joining the school band, and the next one, and the next one, and the next collegiate one in which I wore a uniform with a red coat. And it pointed me toward the love of the band activity that is now a great portion of my life. The shiny instruments, the bright-colored uniforms, The hundreds and hundreds of audience members, the fireworks afterward, it's not often you can pinpoint the moment when it all came together in your head. And that moment was Band Time in Chatham, which is the name of the march that the band always played to open their concerts. After this short fermata, a conversation about a unique way to point young people toward an ever greater love of band. Okay, let's change keys and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, I'm pleased to be joined by a young band director whose resume already contains quite a bit of stuff that is in few other people's, I would judge, and it's about to acquire at least one more item that I'm curious to chat about. Please help me welcome to the program, Bobby BERGERON. Bobby!
Thanks for having me, Rob. It's so exciting to be here and to be chatting with you today.
I'm going to use my traditional opening set of questions to set up our main topic really super well. I'm going to kick this off with my standard first one, which is, what's your primary instrument?
My primary instrument is the tuba. I do play trombone on the side, but my heart and soul is with the tuba.
How did you get into playing that?
Funny story, a previous one of your guests was my high school band director. Do you remember who that is?
I feel like I probably should. Go on.
James Shetler was my high school band director.
No fooling.
And way back in the day at Wareham High School, and we needed a tuba player in the marching band. And I was originally playing saxophone. I switched to sousaphone for the marching band, and I was saving up all this money to buy a Barry sax for me to go off to college with. And then that Barry sax turned into a concert tuba, and I have never looked back.
Everybody's backstory is just a little bit different.
Yep.
So what's your current band-related role?
I technically have a couple, and one of them I'm here to talk about, but my primary gig is the band director for Leominster High School, and I direct the jazz band, the concert band. We just put in a new percussion ensemble, which has been a joy to teach. And of course, there's the Leominster Marching Blue Devils, which is our marching band program, which competes throughout the fall, works hard over the summer. And it's been an absolute joy being the director of that program and watching it grow.
What bands have you been active with in your life, whether it's playing or conducting or whatever?
I started out, as everyone does, with their public school band. I went to Wareham High School, this tiny little town that thinks it's Cape Cod. That's not Cape Cod, but everyone from there says it's Cape Cod. And we had this tiny little band of, I want to say 17 or 18 people. And then I went off and got the complete opposite experience in college, and I joined the UMass Minuteman Marching Band, where my tuba section was larger than my high school marching band, which was an absolute joy for me while I was there. It was a crazy experience going from one extreme to the next. While I was there, I was also a member of the symphony band, the wind ensemble, and I also was a member of the Cadets 2 Drum and Bugle Corps back when that was a thing. After that, I student taught at Oakmont Regional High School, and I built up a really strong relationship with the band director there, Chris DeMora. While I student taught there, I really fell in love with his band program. My first year as a middle school band director, I continued working with the Oakmont Marching Spartans. Then I moved my way through the Leominster school system, and I am now the band director for the Leominster program. Outside of that, I've also been playing the last couple of years with the Salute to America's Band Directors Marching Band, which is a fabulous group made up of exactly what it sounds like, some of the best band directors from around the country. That group has been an out-of-body experience being a part of.
Before we got on to formally recording this, you were chatting a little bit about that and describing what it was like. And it sounded to me as if it was the kind of thing that might function as a way for any band director, but maybe particularly band directors who have been at it for a while, to be reminded of why they thought band was so much fun in the first place.
That's a fantastic way of putting it. It puts us back in the shoes of the kids. The Salute to America's Band Directors band was put together by Kieran Sewell, who is the organizer behind the Sewell Memorial Foundation. See, her husband was the band director for Pickerton, Ohio. He took his band to several Rose parades and Macy's parades. They were a fabulous band. They were a powerhouse out in the Midwest. Mike Sewell unfortunately passed away at a very young age, only a couple years after retirement. And in his memory, Karen put this project together. And this project brings band directors from all across the country and creates a supergroup of everyone who's kind of under the umbrella of marching band. It wasn't just drum corps style marchers or Big Ten school style marchers. It was a little bit of every facet of the activity. If you were to put a Wikipedia page up of marching band and the diverse list that you're going to get, that you and I both know how diverse this activity is, we drew from every single one of those styles. And we got to be band kids again. The stresses of having to worry about the buses or what meal we're going to have went away. And it just became about playing the music, putting on a good performance, and interacting with one another. I have now made connections and friends in almost every single state. I'm in a group chat with all the tuba players, and I am not going to share any of the text messages from that group chat, as we all know how tuba players behave. But there's someone in there from almost every single state. And now we have connections from around the country. We have connections with other band directors across the country. We have resources that we built with other people across the country. And we also got to share in two once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, performing in both the Rose Parade, and then this past Thanksgiving, we performed in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
I remember watching that, but I am fighting to remember what the size of the group was.
Both groups were rather large. The Macy's group was a little bit bigger because everyone saw us at the Rose Parade and wanted to join in the action. I want to say our numbers were around the 400 to 430 mark. I know that the tuba section for Macy's was the largest tuba section I had ever gotten to be a part of. I think we were at 35 or 34 in just the tuba section alone. That's quite a bit of sousaphone.
I'm not sure what a wrong amount of sousaphone is.
There is no wrong amount of sousaphone.
My experience with tuba numbers extends back to high school, where we had a maximum of 2 at any time. And I go off to college, happen to be UMass, and there were 16 tubas in the room when we all first convened. And I looked around and thought, that's more tubas than we had brass players at home. What is going on? Beyond that, my freshman year at UMass, the band was 230 people, which was one more than the number of people in my graduating class. And I just thought, is this what it would have been like if every member of the senior class had been a band geek? I'm in.
And that's kind of what it felt like to get that same feeling back joining this group. You know, there was a magic in the room that first time I was in the big room with the UMass marching band and the entire band was playing together. There was a special kind of magic that only happens once or twice in a band kid's life, right? Where this is an impressive ensemble and you're sitting in it and there's just something magical to be happening. And then you get used to it. Mm-hmm. You know, I went to UMass for 4 years, and by my 4th year, it was just like, you know, everyone, and it's still magical, but it's a different kind of magic. Whereas that day one feeling comes back again whenever I get to play with this band director's band, because first of all, it's almost it's a very different crop of people both times, and we go so long without seeing each other that every time we see each other, that bondness grows even stronger.
And it's people who decided to go into that biz, and so therefore they're at least decent players.
Yeah, at least a whole lot of first trumpet players, I'll tell you that much. No disrespect to any trumpet players, but they know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so I have this little momentum here from the Macy's parade, and it just kind of shows you how band people operate and how all band people are the same. I met you, Rob, at Drum Major Academy way back in the day when I was in high school. Do you remember the type of whistle that we're supposed to have for Drum Major Academy?
If I'm not mistaken, it's called the Thunderer.
The Acme Thunderer, yes, right?
Indeed. Yep.
So at our banquet for the Macy's parade, we all got Acme whistles. And on the side of it, it says the band director's marching band. And then on the other side, it says the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And what stuck out to me is it's not just any old whistle. It's the Acme whistle, which makes me know that this is from band people, for band people, representing band people. And that extra detail went a long way for me.
And it's very possible that average people who might be average Hollywood filmmakers making movies about band might not necessarily know to go to that kind of length.
Right. Yeah, well, you know who was You know who came to speak to us at the band directors band both times, unfortunately not in person, but via video, was Dr. Tim.
Ah,
Dr. Tim was a big advocate for this group, and Dr. Tim actually put an ad together for this group when I first saw it. That was what legitimized it for me. Because if you'll remember, when I first found out about the band directors band, it was a Facebook ad. And this is right around the same time the Fire Festival documentary had come out. So I was skeptical of any online, like, give us money and go do this cool thing. I was afraid everything was a scam. And this was like late 2019 when I first heard about the band directors band. And then they released some promotional material with Dr. Tim in it. And he's talking about come join this band. And then that's when I signed the check. I was like, okay, if Dr. Tim is on this project, I'm in. Again, the types of details that band people would pick up on.
Well, the other project that you had mentioned early on, and that I wondered whether we were going to keep hidden away so that we could spring it on everybody, but there you are, is a project which, even as you described it and before you got into talking about the genesis of it, sounded like an awfully similar project. Talk a little bit more about that New England Honor Band.
So the New England Honor Band is a way for us to get a good representation of New England in Pasadena. Give us the national audience, the national stage, the international audience that music programs up here deserve to have. I was approached in January of well over a year ago by a friend who has some close ties to the Rose Parade. He called me up and he asked me how big my band was. And I said to him, not big enough for whatever you could possibly be asking me for.
Mm-hmm.
He said, any chance Leominster could be marching 150 by January 1st of 2025? And I said, maybe 65, maybe 70 kids, maybe if I'm lucky. But 150? I don't know about that. And then the conversation kind of turned into a story about representation. You know, we have phenomenal musicians up here. We have some fantastic bands up here. I mean, we have Dartmouth High School is up here, for crying out loud. We have some of the best marching arts programs up here. We also are home of 3 really, really well-performing drum corps. We have some of the country's best college marching bands. There's a lot of great stuff happening in New England. And unfortunately, the only ones who ever get the world stage are the ones who bring in the numbers. Well, I know I have 5 or 6 kids in my brass section, 3 or 4 kids in my drum line who are definitely at the level to be able to march a 5.5 mile parade and one of the best parades of all time. But Leominster doesn't have those numbers. Neither does Fitchburg, neither does Oakmont, or neither does really any school in New England right now. We don't have bands that are at the acceptable size for the Rose Parade. Now, with the Rose Parade, they want the bands to have an impact. You know, when they come around that corner, they want your face to kind of blow off a little bit. And we have some great bands out here, but you put one of our bands in one of those arenas, and it's not going to have the impact a band like Hebron High School would, or any of the bands that you see out in the Midwest, Texas, California. These bands are a completely different animal. So we wanted to make sure that we still had a representation on the world stage. So then the conversation turned to, how do we do this? So with the help of Karen Sewell and that organization, we're kind of putting together a band. And it's kind of a little bit of this band, a little bit of that band. So far, we've gotten about 170 nominations for students. It's all by nomination. The band director can go online, nominate their students. It's a very simple process. They just got to include an email, an email of a parent. And at this point, we're not really turning anyone away. If you want to be part of this band, it is an honor. We are asking that you're able to march 5.5 miles comfortably, and that you're capable of marching it on your left foot, and you're capable of doing it while also having your music memorized. Then you should come and be a part of this. There's something special about that parade. I've now marched both of the 2 big parades in the United States, and there's a magic with the Rose Parade, a magic that I can't quite describe until you're on the road itself. It's just a straight line for 5 miles. After you do that turn on TV, it's a straight line, and there's stadium style bleachers for about 5 miles, going through some of the best weather in California. And at the end of it are about 30 In-N-Out food trucks. So there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But when I marched it, the first thing I thought of were my kids. I felt like a band kid again being in the band director's band, but part of the reason why I became a band director is I wanted my kids to have the experiences that I got to have. When I was at UMass, I got to play at Penn State. I got to play in the Macy's parade. These are really cool things. As a band director, I want to be able to give those opportunities to my kids too. And the New England Honor Band, is doing just that. These kids are going to have the opportunity to march down the street in the Rose Parade. They're going to have the opportunity to play at Disneyland and spend a whole day at Disneyland. And one of the really exciting parts is they're also going to get a tour of the float facility and get to be hands-on with making some of the floats for the Rose Parade.
Sign me up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's more than just the parade. It's a phenomenal experience. And playing in a band like the band director's band has only made me more connected with the other band directors across the country. I'm really excited to see what this is going to do for kids who go to NESBA or Micah next fall. And be like, hey, I remember you from the Rose Parade, or we watching the Rose Parade together. It's so nice to meet you. Do you want to be roommates? And then from there, they go off to UConn or UMass or BU, and then they be in the band together there. And we're forming these relationships and these connections.
Just imagine if band members saw their bandmates talking in a friendly way with members of their heated rival bands. I mean, what a big deal that could be.
It's funny you mention that, because I am right next door neighbors to Fitchburg High School, and Fitchburg and Leominster have a rivalry that has gone on for well over 100 years, I believe. I think the first football game was in the 1890s. So there is a rivalry where great grandparents were in the football game, and then the grandparents were in the football game, and then the parents, and now the next generation. So there's a long rivalry between our two districts. Other fun fact about Fitchburg is they were the first band to ever march in the Rose Parade out of Massachusetts back in the 1960s.
Huh.
So they were one of the first people I really reached out to about this project. And it's really nice to say that the two bands that have contributed the most nominations right now are Leominster High School and Fitchburg High School, two arch enemies,
yeah,
who are going to be joining forces to march in one of the biggest parades in the world.
So Leominster and Fitchburg, I'm doing the math here. It's far more than 100 years worth of heated rivalry, and football will help to foster that. And when you've got more than a century worth of that tradition laid down, I wonder if the Leominster and Fitchburg bands have had any opportunities to demonstrate that it can be a friendly rivalry in view of the general public of those two cities.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that, because we did that this past Thanksgiving Day football game. Unfortunately, this was tough for me because I was away in New York City for the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade. So I had to miss the football game. And this football game was very unique, as they held it at Fenway Park this past year.
Oh, that's right.
So I unfortunately missed out on the collaboration of the two bands at Fenway Park. But what I was able to do was, I thought this would be a great opportunity for the two bands to come together. I have the history of UMass and Delaware in my mind, and thinking about the stories about how those were rivals going back. And I've been trying to create moments like that on the field. And I reached out to Tabitha, who is the band director over at Fitchburg. She's a great person. She's doing great work over there. I said, I bought this sheet music on JW Pepper. I took a blank piece of drill and just sketched out a shape. And I texted her, how many band members do you have? How many of this instrument do you have? How many of that? She gives me her numbers, and I draw it out, and I just make a very simple shape. It's a little bit more interesting than a block, but it's kind of a rhombus kind of thing. And we go out on the field, and I'm sitting there at some restaurant in New York City, speaking with a couple of band directors from around the country, and I say, hold on one second, and I pull up my phone, and halftime comes on, and I'm watching the band play Sweet Caroline at Fenway Park. And I felt like there's no better song for the bands to be playing together than Sweet Caroline at Fenway Park. They had a fantastic show. It was an opportunity for the two bands to play together. And what I'm watching happening is, we do a lot of things as bands together, but I haven't seen the kids really connect yet. We have a combined band fundraiser that we do the week before Thanksgiving, where both bands put on a concert for a breakfast kind of thing. And there have been many opportunities for the kids to really start to get closer with one another. It was when they performed together where I started to see the connections really start to spark. All the more reason why everyone should be signing their kids up for this New England Honor Band. Imagine what that's going to do across the states.
I'm going to be able to get some links into the show notes for this podcast episode that will point people directly to the place where they need to go in order to sign up and find out more and audition and all that sort of stuff. Are they talking to you or are they talking to somebody else?
So they're not talking to me. They're going to be talking to a travel agency who's working closely with us, who has a lot of experience with the Rose Parade. That's Drew Ninja Travel. But specifically, my role is the assistant band director. I'm doing a lot of work in regards to recruiting right now, reaching out to band directors. If you're a band director listening to this, you've probably received an email from me if you're in New England, perhaps multiple. I have spammed quite a few people's emails, and most of which have gone to no result, but a lot of which have come to a lot of really positive results. I'm just the assistant band director for this group. I'm sure that I'm going to have some musical responsibilities once we get on the ground in Pasadena. John Waters is our band director. He's going to be sending some acceptance letters to the students, giving them some information as we get a little bit closer. But he's the assistant teaching professor and athletic bands director at Bowling Green University. And his claim to fame is he went back in his undergrad, got to dot the I at Ohio State, which is a huge tradition for some tuba players.
That's a big deal.
He was also our band director for both band directors bands, which is how I got to know him.
I was going to wonder if there was that connection there directly. Yeah.
It's the overlap that it's Karen Sewell's group who's kind of overseeing the big project, which is part of the reason why we brought John on, because John and Karen already have that connection. John and I spoke at the Macy's parade about some of the connections I have here in New England, and has now taken me on as the assistant band director, which I'm really excited about, because I am one of only 2 directors who are really on the project in an administration role. That being said, we have a lot of band directors from across New England who are helping out the project. Some band directors from the band directors band are coming over and helping us out with recruiting. Will help us out once we get to Pasadena. But it's been a lot of fun working side by side with John, seeing how other people do things. That's a really important thing in this activity.
And I can well imagine that this project is made a little bit less daunting by the fact that there is institutional memory of a sort and certainly infrastructure in place, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to invent it from whole cloth.
We've done something similar to this before, and these people have worked with honor bands before, and I've worked with a group similar to this before. The only thing that is daunting at this point in time is time itself. If we had a whole nother year, it'd be a whole nother conversation. Yes, it feels like New Year's Day is a very, very long time away, but getting 200 students from here to Pasadena for a 6-day trip in California takes a lot of planning. And I have learned a lot about logistics, about Google spreadsheets in just the last few months. And a lot of it's been learning by trial of fire, just in the moment, figuring it out. I'm very excited to have this on my resume, and it's a big honor for me, being 29 years old and being able to say I'm an assistant director for a group that's going to be in the Rose Parade. I also arranged a tune for the Rose Parade. We'll see if they use it or not. I'm hoping that they cut me a break and let me play my version of Shipping Off to Boston in the Rose Parade. But even if not, I'm just so grateful to be having this opportunity and be sharing it with my kids and be sharing it with the kids of New England, because I think these kids deserve that opportunity.
Okay, where do they find that opportunity?
It's very easy to remember, www.newenglandhonorband.com. All we're looking for is a nomination from your band director. So reach out to that band director, say this is something I want to be a part of, and send that nomination over.
So before we finish up, let me hit you with some slightly less strictly resume-based lightning round band questions, in part because there are some questions that I am reasonably assured you're going to answer interestingly, but also if I do this right, there's one more topic that we can get to, which will be kind of fun. The first one, what's one of your favorite pieces of band music that you've played, either outdoors or indoors?
I feel like my answer is going to seem like a cop-out of an answer, but it really isn't. Stars and Stripes Forever. And here's why. For me, I see it as the most standard band rep we can get, but it represents so many different facets of band. I'm not out there waving the American flag left and right, but I've just had so many fond memories playing Stars and Stripes. And recently, my high school band has been able to play it for the first time. And it's kind of like a milestone for me as a band director that we've been working at this, and boom, we just played it, and it was fantastic. And this past weekend, we were at Lemonster's graduation. We do a little pre-band concert before graduation, and we get to the big reprise of the trio, and there's probably 700 people in the stadium at this point, and they're all clapping
Ah.
in time with Stars and Stripes. And I'm like, we did it. The whole trombone and trumpet section stand up, and my hair is flying back because the trombone players are using all the air in their lungs. And it's not always about the piece, it's more about the moments. And that was a really special moment to share. Another favorite piece of band music of mine that I just love, which I also put on the same program, was Hymn Song of Philip Bliss by David Holsinger, for completely different reasons than Stars and Stripes Forever. But I just have such an emotional attachment to that piece of music. It's so beautiful, top to bottom. When a band can play it well, it sings.
Yeah.
I love that piece, especially the little playoff with the woodwind section at the beginning, back and forth with those eighth note runs. Ah, gorgeous.
To flip that around, what's a piece of band music that you've never played but you would like to?
I have a piece that I've played but I've never conducted that I really want to conduct.
That counts.
Does that count?
Oh, absolutely. I've got those.
La Fiesta Mexicana.
Mm.
For me, being on the side of the tuba or being on the side of the baton are two very different experiences. I love both of them in different ways, but having experienced on one side of things, I don't know. La Fiesta was just it was really my first epic piece of music that I ever got to play. I had never even heard it until my freshman year of college, and that's the only experience I even have with it. And from that point, I mean, I can't even remember how my part really went. I've listened to it so many times now that I've almost forgotten that I've gotten the chance to play it, because I met it when I was so young and didn't really kind of understand the significance of it. And now that I've grown up and matured into a band director, I realize the majesty of that piece and the dimensions of that piece, really literally taking chunks of the band and throwing it into the wings, and giving it the illusion that there's bands in the distance. It's really programmatic and storytelling, even though it's just the composer traveling.
Similar question coming next, which is there a band that you love to perform with that you haven't, either because you're not the right age, or you're not in the right location, or you don't live in the right time?
If given the opportunity, I would love to go back and experience a different type of college marching band. I would love to do a Michigan. I would love to do like a Big Ten band and just see what that's like. Maybe Texas, the Aggie band, where they do all the 45-degree angles. That'd be really fun to march. And heck, maybe dot the I, like something that's not UMass. UMass, University of Delaware. I even say Westchester. We all kind of have that same like kind of drum corps, kind of not style, which is great. It was a blast. I loved it. But I'd kind of like to go see what like Big Ten is all about. I'd love to go. I want to go with Michigan. I would love to go back in time and march with the Michigan band.
I mean, that's only the band that we all kind of point to as the progenitor.
Correct. Yeah. I love marching band. I love, 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 love marching band. And if for me to truly authentically say I love marching band, I need to be a little bit curious about what those other groups have to offer. And I have become more curious. I remember there was one night, it was the night before the Rose Parade. And to kind of just show you the diversity of the front line of tuba players, if you go back and watch that video, you have me smack dab in the middle of the line. And this entire line of tuba players, we were all out at a bar the night before, being festive and being merry and enjoying New Year's. To my left was the former section leader of the Penn State tuba section. Next to him was a section leader from Spirit of Atlanta Drum Bugle Corps. To my right was a gentleman who had been a band director for 40 years. And then to the right of him was the band director of New Orleans Regional High School, where he goes out in the yellow uniform and like is dancing with his band out on the field. And so like just the five of us alone, same stories, but very different stories. And I remember we were sitting at the bar and two other members of the section were like, At my Big Ten school, we could spell out words with 10, we could spell out words that had 10 letters in this amount of time. Well, at my school, we could spell out words that had 11 letters in this amount of time. And I'm thinking to myself, we made an M one time, and that's what we did. It just goes to show you that, like, we're all different, but we're all the same.
I'm thinking this may segue very nicely. Have you got a favorite band story you want to tell?
There are so many. Now, remember, I was also in the tuba section, so I'm limited to what I can bring to the table. I came from this tiny little school, and we already talked about this tiny little school where all of our drill was in front of the front hash and in between the 30s. We lived in that we lived in that box. And I remember my freshman year getting a coordinate chart, and it was something along the lines of on 20-yard line, on backside line. Yeah, and when I hit to college, and I'm like, I am in uncharted territory right now. Like I'm like 100 miles from the 50-yard line right now. I was very accustomed. I wasn't that great at reading drill right away. And it wasn't, I think I mentioned earlier, I had done drum corps my sophomore year. I'm wrong. I had done drum corps my junior, going into my junior year, because my sophomore year was my first year on field staff with UMass. Now, the tubas always take things to that extra mile, but there was a specific day at band camp where the tuba field staff decided that for our pants, rather than wearing pants, we were going to wear these alligator boxers. These alligator boxers that we had purchased at Walmart a couple days before, that I'm pretty sure by the end of band camp I threw out, because I was never going to wear these alligator boxers ever again. So there was a day where I was just wearing alligator boxers as my bottom. Now, one of the members of field staff was feeling very ill that morning, so he did not come to band. The other two members of field staff had one of those small group gigs that they had to go off to. So I was left alone with the tuba section. We were learning drill to Malagueña that day. And now I joined field staff as the musical side of things. I was a music major. I was a tuba player. So what I brought to the table was on the musical side of things. I was not very proficient at reading drill by this point in my life. And here I am teaching drill to the tuba section alone in my underwear. That is the definition of an absolute nightmare. Thankfully, the other two field staff members come around the corner, both in travel uniforms, not in their underwear, and take a picture of this happening. I believe we had like a binder for the field staff, and we made that like the cover of the binder for a few days for the rest of the season. Me having to teach the tuba section drill in my underwear, and
that is a story that does not get told in orchestra circles or in jazz circles or in choral circles.
No,
I don't believe that I can top that in any way, other than to say it has been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation, and I was glad we were able to get the New England Honor Band project even a little bit more exposure than it's had, and see if we can pick up some more members. I am sure there's a podcaster rule book that says you must ask. It is very important to ask at the end of one of these things if there's somewhere online that you can be found.
Well, in reference to the Honor Band, there's going to be a link to the NewEnglandHonorBand.com. But another place you can find me, I'm hoping within the next year or so, two close friends of mine, Alec Hovey, who is a former music educator who now is an ex-music educator who works in the banking industry, but does a lot more gigging on the side now, along with our friend Adam Strand, who isn't a musician in its traditional sense, but loves listening to music and dabbles with the stand-up comedy scene a little bit. So he brings a completely new element to the table. And we're just going to be listening to music and talking about music. The plan is to listen to an album of music separately, come together and talk about it, and talk about the history behind the work, and talk about some of the musicality behind it and little intricacies. And our friend Adam, who doesn't have much of a musical background, will make sure to add insight and humble us when we're using terminology that he's not quite familiar with, and say, for our listeners, what does rubato mean, or what does timbre mean, and allow for there to be a resource of education there too for people who might not know how to talk about music or are interested in learning how to talk about music. Aaron Copland once wrote a great book, What to Listen For in Music, and that's kind of what this podcast is going to be, just with any album of music that you can throw around. I think the first album that we're going to be talking about and breaking down is going to be Green Day's American Idiot, which is, anyone from my generation, we grew up on that album. And now that we've said it, the other two are going to hear this podcast and they're going to know that we have to get going on that project. So I'd love to have the first episode recorded before I go back to school. So
no pressure, gentlemen. Well, band director, tuba player, guy who's been on national TV a couple of times, Bobby BERGERON, thanks so much for giving us a bit of your time and a piece of your mind, and I look forward to doing another conversation with you sometime.
Absolutely, Rob. Let's make it sooner rather than later.
And on the other side of this brief pause, more BandWagon. Thanks so much for sticking around. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is another brief note about podcast infrastructure, specifically this podcast's musical signature theme. It's the one that signals the beginning of the introduction and end credits, and signals the end of most segments. There are slightly different versions, so that I don't always have to end a segment with a loud and bouncy sound, but perhaps a quieter one, or one with a more marching battery-esque sound. And it's not really a theme, so the music composition majors in the room can relax. I know it's not really long enough, it's actually just a motif, I know. But that motif has a curious backstory, and here it is. As much as I'd like to claim that great musical motifs come to me in dreams, or spring from my keyboard-playing fingers as a function of my aesthetic inspiration, instead I have a device that I use a lot, which generates strings of pitches that every so often really do work as musical phrases. This is more of a challenge to describe just on audio than it would be if this were a video podcast, but I ain't doing video, thank you, so picture this. First, I wrote out a string of letters A through Z. Underneath those, I wrote out the numbers 1 through 26 to correspond with those letters. Good so far. Underneath those, I wrote out the musical alphabet A through G and repeated until each alphabet letter A through Z had a corresponding musical alphabet letter. So, a bunch of minor scales. Underneath that, I wrote out the musical alphabet C, D, E, F, G, A, B and repeated those similarly. So, a bunch of major scales. And just for fun, underneath all that, I wrote out a chromatic scale. So, C, C sharp, D, E flat, E, F, F sharp, etc. and repeated those until I ran out of A through Z letters. So with this decoding device, I can choose a word, convert that word to numbers, plug those numbers in, work out which pitches correspond to those numbers in my minor, major, and chromatic scale models, and see if any of those pitch sequences seem remotely like coherent musical phrases. Most times, but sometimes, gold. So did I take the word bandwagon and convert it into a 9-pitch musical phrase? I did not. Originally, my idea of a title for this podcast was Band Together. Made sense to me, that's what I hoped we were going to do. So I plugged the 8-letter word together into my optospectrometer, my musical phrase generator device, and got 2 4-pitch motifs that were startlingly similar. I honestly don't remember whether they came from the minor or major scale portion of the thing, but those pitches sounded like this. Cool. I'll just plug a little 2-note coda onto the end, and I'll get... magic. But then I did a little pre-production research going online to see if there were any other podcasts called Band Together. And there weren't. Hooray! But there was a company with that name. Their business is doing similar things to the School of Rock franchise, music education through pop and rock music. I contacted them to see if they minded if I named my podcast the same thing as they'd named their business. I didn't expect them to say yes, and indeed they did not. But I thought it was the ethical thing to do, and they were very nice when they told me to go find some other name, please. As it turned out, I liked the name BandWagon better anyway. That's not sour grapes, I promise. Even now, I still think it works better. So, why didn't I plug the new name BandWagon into my phrase generator, and why have I still not run this little experiment? Because I liked the together motif perfectly well, and decided not to mess with success. Also, I'd rather not find out that a 9-note bandwagon motif was absolutely perfect and would have won me a Webby Award. Maybe someday, but today is not that day. And that's the rest of the story. After this last break, I'll wrap things up for the week. Thanks for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the CODA. For the CODA this week, it's a quote that I saw some time ago on social media from a gentleman named Vaughn Fleishfresser. He's a music professor from Australia, as it happens, and you may well have seen quite a number of quotes from him online, all of them in support of the study of music. They're too long to put on an Argus poster generally, and, dear listener, if you're not of a certain age, you have no idea what an Argus poster is. Anyway, never mind. Here's the quote. Band builds better people. It really does. Music ensembles of any kind, for that matter. It was in band I discovered I had a voice that was valued and part of a much bigger whole. It was in band I discovered my confidence, both musical and personal. It was in band I discovered the importance of discipline, focus, and selflessness. It was in band I discovered there were other people just like me. It was in band I discovered I was good at something. It was in band I discovered that hard work pays off. It was in band I discovered how to interact and work with people of all ages. It was in band I discovered how my actions impact others. It was in band I discovered how to manage my nerves. It was in band I discovered the sheer joy of making music with others. It was in band I discovered that being prepared isn't always enough. It was in band I discovered how to deal with making mistakes. It was in band I discovered how awesome making music with other people is. It was in band I discovered myself. It was in band I discovered my calling. It is in band that I always have a source of comfort, a family, and a sanctuary away from the world around me. Band helped build the best version of me. Maybe one or all of these sentences hit you where you live. They hit me all right. Quite a number of them count as those extra musical benefits that music teachers are sometimes so conflicted about emphasizing. But in this moment, that's okay, I think. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at our website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me polite feedback. Let me know what you like, what you think might change. You can do that using our email address, heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave us a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that we do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast unless you say otherwise. Contact links and links to our news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, Bobby BERGERON, can be found in our show notes. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, get someone else to listen as well. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with us every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And please give us a 5-star review. It really helps other people to find the show. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton, and remember, it's not spit, it's condensation.